They rejected her for being the ugly Apache girl, until the rancher said, "She is mine." From the moment she could walk, she learned that she was different in a way the town did not forgive easily. Her face did not match what the town liked to see. Her skin was darker than most, her hair thick and black, her features sharp and strong, shaped by generations of Apache blood. People stared when she passed by. Some looked quickly away, as if she reminded them of something they did not want to face. Others looked longer with quiet judgment in their eyes. No one ever said kind things about her appearance. Even as a child, she could feel it. At school, she sat in the back, close to the wall. Teachers rarely called on her, not because she was slow, but because she was easy to ignore. When children were asked to pair up, she was always the last one standing. Sometimes no one chose her at all, and the teacher had to force someone to take her hand. Laughter followed her through the halls, soft but sharp enough to cut. She never cried in front of them. She learned early that tears only made things worse. At home, life was not much easier. Her family loved her in their own quiet way, but they had lived with rejection for so long that it felt normal to them. Her mother taught her to stay silent, to keep her head down, to never answer back. "The world does not change," her mother often said. "We survive by not being seen." Those words stayed with her, shaping the way she walked, the way she spoke, the way she breathed. As she grew older, she learned how to make herself smaller. She avoided mirrors when she could. When she did look, she searched for the flaws others seemed to find so easily. She wondered what it felt like to be beautiful, to be wanted, to be greeted with smiles instead of looks filled with doubt. These thoughts stayed locked inside her, never spoken aloud. Every morning before the sun fully rose, she helped her family with small tasks. She cleaned, cooked, and walked long distances to fetch water or supplies. Work was the only place where she felt useful. No one praised her, but no one could say she was lazy. Her hands grew rough from effort, her back strong from carrying weight far heavier than her age should allow. Still, none of it earned her respect in town. When she walked through the main street, shop owners watched her closely. Some followed her movements as if expecting trouble. Others ignored her completely, speaking to people behind her as though she did not exist. Once, when she tried to ask for work at a local store, the owner barely looked up. He told her there was nothing for her and suggested she try somewhere else, though the sign on the door clearly said help was needed. She tried again and again in different places. Each time the answer was the same. Sometimes it was polite, sometimes it was not. She learned to read rejection before words were even spoken. A tight smile, a raised eyebrow, a pause that lasted too long. These small signs became familiar companions. At community gatherings, she stood at the edges, watching others laugh and talk. She never joined the circles. No one invited her in. The music played, food was shared, stories were told, but she remained apart, like a shadow that did not belong to the light. People spoke about her when they thought she could not hear. They said she was strange, plain, unwanted. They spoke as if her worth was decided by her face alone. There were moments, quiet and rare, when she wished someone would see her differently. Not with pity, not with judgment, just see her. She dreamed of a life where she could walk freely without feeling like a burden on the world. These dreams came mostly at night, when the desert cooled and the stars filled the sky. Under that wide silence, she allowed herself to imagine something better. But morning always came, and with it, reality returned. She put on worn clothes, tied back her hair, and stepped outside to face another day of being overlooked. People passed her without greeting. Children learned from their parents and repeated the same behaviors. The cycle continued, steady and unkind. Still, she endured. There was a quiet strength inside her that even she did not fully understand. She showed up where she was needed. She finished every task she was given. She did not complain. In her silence lived patience, and in her patience lived survival. The town mistook her quiet nature for weakness, never realizing how much she carried within. On some evenings, she sat alone and listened to the stories of her elders, tales of resilience and pride from generations before her. These stories reminded her that her blood came from people who had survived far worse than whispers and stares. Though the town rejected her, her roots ran deep into the land itself. This thought gave her comfort, even if the world around her refused to change. She did not know it yet, but her life was slowly moving toward a moment that would break the silence she had lived in for so long. At this point, she only knew rejection, loneliness, and endurance. She believed this was all life had planned for her. She had no idea that someone somewhere nearby had already noticed her, not for what the town said she was, but for who she truly was. The town did not soften with time. If anything, it grew harder toward her as she grew older. Childhood rejection had been quiet and careless, but adulthood rejection was sharp and intentional. People no longer ignored her by accident. They chose to do it. Every look, every pause in conversation when she walked by, reminded her that she was not welcome among them. She began taking work wherever she could find it, mostly outside the town, where people cared more about results than appearances. She cleaned storage sheds, helped mend fences, carried supplies, and worked long hours under the open sky. The sun burned her skin and the wind cut across her face, but she preferred this pain to the quiet cruelty of human voices. Out there, the land did not judge her. It only asked that she keep moving. When she returned to town at the end of the day, dust clinging to her clothes, people stared again. Some whispered openly now. They thought she could not hear, or maybe they did not care if she did. Words followed her like stones thrown from behind. She never turned around. She kept walking step by step, teaching herself not to react. Once at a public meeting, she stood at the back as usual. A discussion began about hiring help for a new project. She raised her hand slowly, her heart pounding, and said she was willing to work. The room fell quiet. Several people exchanged looks. One man cleared his throat and said nothing. Another shook his head. The leader thanked her politely and moved on, choosing someone else who had not even offered yet. She lowered her hand and felt that familiar ache settle deep inside her chest. At home, her family worried about her, but they did not know how to help. They had lived this life too long. Her mother reminded her again to stay strong, to not expect kindness where none had ever been given. Her father avoided the topic altogether, as if speaking about it would only deepen the wound. Love existed in that small house, but hope felt fragile. There were nights when the weight became too heavy. She would sit outside, listening to the distant sounds of laughter drifting from town. She wondered what it felt like to be accepted without effort, to belong without proving worth every single day. These thoughts scared her because they made her want something more. Wanting, she had learned, often led to disappointment. As months passed, stories about her spread, most of them unkind. People created their own version of who she was, filling the gaps with judgment. They said she was strange, unfriendly, ungrateful. They never noticed how often she smiled politely, how she always said thank you, how she avoided trouble at all costs. It was easier for them to believe she deserved her place at the edge. She began to feel invisible and exposed at the same time. Invisible because no one truly saw her heart, and exposed because everyone believed they knew her already. This strange feeling followed her everywhere, even when she was alone. It shaped the way she stood, the way she spoke, the way she avoided drawing attention. One afternoon, while helping repair an old fence on a distant property, she noticed how peaceful she felt away from town. The work was hard but honest. The animals did not flinch when she approached. The open land did not whisper behind her back. For a moment, she allowed herself to imagine a future where she could live and work far from judging eyes. But reality returned quickly. She needed the small town, even if it did not want her. Supplies, work opportunities, and family ties kept her connected. Leaving was not as simple as dreaming. She understood that survival sometimes meant staying where you were unwanted. The way people treated her slowly changed something inside her. She stopped expecting fairness. She stopped hoping for kindness. Instead, she focused on endurance. Each day became a task to complete rather than a life to enjoy. She told herself that if she stayed quiet and useful, she could make it through. Yet, deep inside, there was still a part of her that refused to disappear. A small voice that reminded her of the stories her elders told. Stories of strength, of dignity, of standing firm even when the world tried to break you. That voice kept her upright when shame threatened to bend her. One evening, while walking past the edge of town, she noticed people gathered near the main road. Laughter filled the air. She slowed her steps, not to join them but to pass without drawing attention. As she walked by, a few heads turned. Someone laughed louder. Someone else made a remark she chose not to hear. Her hands clenched briefly, then relaxed. She kept moving. She did not see the way one pair of eyes followed her longer than the rest. She did not notice the pause in that person's expression, or the quiet thought that formed as she disappeared down the road. She only knew the familiar feeling of being dismissed once again. By the time she reached home, the sky had darkened. She washed her hands, ate quietly, and prepared for another early morning. Life felt like an unchanging path stretching endlessly ahead of her. Rejection had become routine. Loneliness had become normal. She believed this was how her story would continue, unnoticed, unchosen, and unspoken. What she did not know was that the town's judgment was slowly building toward a moment that would challenge everything it believed. And at the center of that coming moment, she would no longer be standing alone. She did not notice him at first. Her days were too full of work and careful silence to leave room for watching others. Every morning, she walked the same dusty road, carrying tools or supplies, her thoughts fixed on finishing the day without trouble. If someone looked at her, she felt it, but she never looked back. Years of rejection had trained her eyes to stay lowered. He had seen her many times, sometimes from a distance, sometimes close enough to notice the small details others missed. He saw how she arrived early and stayed late. He saw how she listened carefully when given instructions and followed them exactly. He noticed how she never argued, never complained, even when work was unfair or payment was small. To him, these things mattered more than looks or rumors. The ranch was one of the few places where she felt almost at ease. The land was wide and the work was steady. Animals responded to calm hands, not to faces. Fences needed fixing whether a person was accepted or not. Out there, effort spoke louder than words. She did not know the rancher well. She only knew that he was quiet, firm, and fair. He paid on time. He expected honesty and gave the same in return. He noticed how the others spoke about her when they thought she was not nearby. He did not like the tone. He had grown up learning to judge people by what they did, not by where they came from or how they looked. Each time he heard a careless comment, something inside him tightened. He began to pay closer attention. One afternoon, the work ran longer than expected. The sun dipped low, painting the land in gold and shadow. Most of the workers left early, but she stayed, finishing a task no one else wanted. When she finally looked up, she realized she was not alone. The rancher stood a short distance away, watching quietly. For a moment, she felt that familiar fear of being judged. Instead, he thanked her. The words were simple, but the way he said them was different. There was no doubt in his voice, no hidden meaning, just respect. She nodded, unsure how to respond. Respect was something she was not used to receiving. She walked away with her heart beating a little faster than usual. From that day on, he found reasons to speak to her. Nothing personal, nothing that crossed boundaries. Just questions about the work, small instructions, brief conversations about the weather or the land. She answered politely, carefully, always expecting the kindness to disappear. But it did not. Others began to notice the change. Whispers followed again, but this time they carried confusion. Why would the rancher speak to her like that? Why would he trust her with responsibility? People watched closely, waiting for a mistake. She felt the pressure, but she did not fail. If anything, she worked harder. One day, trouble came without warning. A rumor spread through town, twisted and unfair. It painted her as someone she was not. The story moved fast, fed by old prejudice and careless mouths. By the time she heard it, the damage was already done. She felt the familiar shame settle over her, heavy and cold. At a public gathering, the tension reached its peak. People spoke loudly, judgment filling the air. She stood at the edge as always, wishing she could disappear. She knew what was coming. She had lived this moment many times before when silence was expected from her. Before she could turn away, a voice cut through the noise. Calm. Steady, certain. The rancher stepped forward. People stopped talking. They were not used to him involving himself in town matters. He looked around, then spoke clearly so everyone could hear. "She is mine," he said. The words fell into the silence like a stone into still water. No one laughed. No one spoke. He did not mean ownership in the way the town twisted things. He meant responsibility. He meant protection. He meant choice. She stood frozen, unsure if she had heard correctly. He continued, his voice firm but controlled. He spoke about her work, her honesty, her character. He said she had done nothing wrong. He said judgment without truth was wrong. Every sentence felt like a wall being built between her and the cruelty she had always faced. She felt something shift inside her. Fear mixed with disbelief. No one had ever stood up for her like that, not publicly, not without hesitation. Her hands trembled, but she did not lower her head. For the first time she lifted her eyes and met the looks around her. Some faces showed anger, some showed doubt, some showed shame. The rancher did not back down. He placed himself beside her, not in front, not behind, beside. That simple act meant more than words. The gathering ended without resolution, but nothing was the same. As people dispersed, whispers returned, but they carried a new tone. Uncertainty had replaced certainty. She walked home that night feeling lighter and heavier at the same time. Lighter because someone had finally seen her. Heavier because she knew this choice would bring consequences. At home, she sat quietly, replaying the moment again and again. The words echoed in her mind. She wondered why he had done it. She wondered what it would cost him. Most of all, she wondered what it meant for her future. The next morning, the town felt different, not kinder but changed. Eyes followed her with new interest. Some avoided her, others studied her openly. She went to work as usual, unsure of what to expect. When she arrived at the ranch, the rancher greeted her the same way he always had. No drama, no explanation, just steady respect. That steadiness grounded her. She focused on her tasks, letting her hands do what they knew best. Inside, something fragile began to grow. Not hope exactly, but possibility. The idea that life might not always be defined by rejection. She did not know what would come next. She only knew that someone had chosen to stand with her, and that choice had cracked open a future she had never allowed herself to imagine. After that day, life did not become easy. The town did not suddenly change its heart. Kindness did not arrive like a gift. Instead, everything grew tense, like the air before a storm. People watched her more closely than ever. Some looked at her with anger, some with doubt, and some with quiet curiosity. She felt all of it the moment she stepped outside. At first, she wanted to hide. Standing beside someone who had defended her felt strange and heavy. She worried she would cause trouble for him. She worried that the town would punish her in new ways. Fear followed her like a shadow, but she kept going. Turning back would mean returning to the silence she had lived in for so long. Work at the ranch increased. The rancher trusted her with more responsibility. He did not announce it. He simply treated her the same way he treated anyone who proved themselves reliable. She fixed fences, managed supplies, and helped with tasks that required careful attention. Every job she completed added a small piece to her confidence. People noticed. Some workers did not like it. They spoke behind her back, questioning why she was given such trust. She heard the whispers but refused to let them slow her down. She focused on the work, reminding herself that effort was something no one could take away from her. The rancher never raised his voice in her defense again, but he did not need to. His actions spoke clearly. When someone questioned her presence, he answered calmly. When someone tried to push her aside, he corrected them without anger. This quiet support meant more to her than loud words ever could. Outside the ranch, the town reacted differently. Some shops still refused her service. Some people crossed the street when they saw her coming, but a few things began to shift. A shopkeeper who had once ignored her now greeted her briefly. A neighbor nodded instead of turning away. These small changes felt uncertain but real. At home, her family noticed the difference in her. She stood straighter. She spoke a little more. Her mother watched her closely, unsure whether to worry or feel proud. One evening, her mother said softly that she seemed stronger. The words stayed with her long after the night ended. There were difficult days, too. Once a group of townspeople confronted her indirectly, speaking loudly about people who did not belong. She felt the old pain rise up, sharp and familiar. Her first instinct was to retreat, to disappear. But she did not. She finished her errand and walked away with steady steps, even though her heart raced. The rancher saw her later that day and asked if she was all right. She almost said yes out of habit. Then she paused and told the truth. Not everything, but enough. He listened without interrupting. He did not offer solutions or comfort that felt empty. He simply acknowledged her feelings and reminded her that she was not alone. That reminder mattered. As weeks passed, working side by side created an unspoken understanding between them. They did not speak much about personal matters, but trust grew naturally. She learned that he valued fairness above all else. He learned that she carried strength shaped by years of endurance. Respect formed quietly without force. The town faced its own struggle. People argued among themselves. Some believed the rancher was right. Others felt threatened by change. Old beliefs clashed with new realities. The tension did not explode, but it simmered beneath daily life. One evening, a storm rolled across the land. Wind howled and rain fell hard. Work had to be done despite the weather. She stayed late, helping secure equipment and animals. When the storm finally passed, exhaustion settled into her bones. She sat on the steps of the ranch house, staring at the wet ground. The rancher joined her, offering water. They sat in silence, listening to the last drops fall. For the first time, she allowed herself to speak about her past, not in detail, but enough to share how rejection had shaped her. He listened carefully, his expression thoughtful. He told her that strength did not always look loud or proud. Sometimes it looked like survival. Those words touched something deep inside her. She realized that her quiet endurance was not a weakness, but a form of courage. The next day, she walked into town with less fear, not because people had changed, but because she had. She no longer measured her worth by their reactions. She still felt pain when cruelty appeared, but it no longer defined her completely. Children began to watch her differently. Some asked her questions. Some smiled. She answered gently, remembering how early lessons shaped behavior. If she could change even one small perspective, it felt meaningful. The town was still divided, but something important had begun. She was no longer invisible. She was no longer silent. She existed fully, openly, without apology. Standing beside someone who respected her had helped her learn to respect herself. She did not know where this path would lead. She only knew that she was walking it with her head lifted, ready to face whatever came next. Time did what arguments never could. It softened edges, wore down certainty, and forced people to look again. Days turned into weeks and weeks into seasons. The town kept moving, and so did she. Each morning she rose before the sun, tied her hair back, and stepped into the world with steady purpose. The work continued, and with it, her quiet growth. People began to rely on her more than they expected. When something needed fixing, her name came up. When an animal went missing, she was asked to help search. When supplies were counted, her careful notes were trusted. These changes did not come with apologies or explanations. They came naturally, almost without notice. That was how real change arrived in that town, slow, reluctant, but real. Some of the same people who once ignored her now spoke to her with respect. They asked questions. They listened to her answers. A few even thanked her. Each small moment felt strange, as if she were living a life she had only imagined before. She accepted these moments quietly, not out of pride, but out of understanding. She knew how hard it was for people to admit they were wrong. Her family felt the shift too. At home, conversations grew warmer. Laughter returned to the small house. Her parents watched her with a mix of relief and wonder. They had raised her to survive, not to hope. Now they saw her doing both. One evening, her father told her he was proud of her. The words were simple, but they stayed with her long after he said them. The rancher remained steady through it all. He did not change the way he treated her just because the town had changed. He continued to expect honesty and effort, and he continued to give respect in return. Over time, their shared work turned into shared understanding. They talked more freely now about the land, the past, and the future. There were moments when she still felt the old doubt rise up. Years of rejection do not disappear easily. But now, when those feelings came, she did not face them alone. She had learned to speak, to ask, to trust. That made all the difference. The town faced a turning point during a large community gathering. People from nearby areas came together to discuss shared concerns and plans. She attended, standing not at the edge this time, but among others. When questions arose about work and responsibility, someone mentioned her efforts. Another person agreed. Soon, more voices joined in. She listened quietly, her heart steady. When she was asked to speak, she hesitated only for a moment. Then she spoke calmly, honestly, without anger or blame. She talked about work, fairness, and the value of seeing people for what they do. Her words were not dramatic, but they were true. The crowd listened. After that day, something settled in the town. It was not perfect, but it was better. Children grew up watching her move confidently through the streets. They learned different lessons than the ones their parents had learned. That mattered more than anything. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky with soft colors, she stood near the ranch house, looking out at the land. The rancher joined her, as he often did. They talked quietly, the way people do when words are no longer forced. He told her that choosing to stand beside her had been easy. Doing what was right often was. She smiled, feeling warmth spread through her chest. For the first time, she allowed herself to believe that she was not defined by the town's past judgment. She was defined by her strength, her effort, and her heart. The future did not promise ease, but it promised honesty, and that was enough. She had walked through rejection and come out standing. She had learned that worth does not come from approval, but from knowing who you are. As the light faded and stars appeared, she felt a deep sense of peace. Her journey had not erased the past, but it had transformed it. She was no longer the girl people rejected. She was a woman who had claimed her place in the world, step by steady step, and never let it be taken away again.